Why? Okay, it goes back to this thing, the clash of freedom, spiritual autonomy, and state-sponsored worship. You had to worship the gods in a particular way, according to these pagan emperors. And if you didn't, you were suspect. It's like a thought crime. And so people committing the thought crime of wanting a society based on freedom and love were being punished. And it would be tragic if it's true that this woman paid for it with her life. But anyway, the good news is she wrote it. And the story she tells here is that when Zechariah was one time in the temple serving, it was his job to go into the inner sanctum of the temple and burn incense to Yahweh. And he was the only one allowed in at that time into the inner sanctum. And at that moment, an angel appears to him. And we have the report of what happened in the narrative. Now, this we can only have this because Zechariah would have told his wife, Elizabeth. And then Elizabeth in turn would have told her cousin, Mary. And they would have in turn told their two children, John the Baptist and Jesus. So this must be a family story we're eavesdropping on. Now, the text says that an angel appears and talks to him. My own interpretation of that as a philosopher is, we don't necessarily have to think there was an angel visually, like there in 3D, like in a movie. I think it's more a state of consciousness suddenly appears in the temple, Holy of Holies, that Zechariah recognises isn't him. It's like a visitation. And the thought comes to him, because I've read that angels communicate telepathically. I believe that. That the thought comes to him telepathically that, you are going to have a son, and your wife Elizabeth is going to bear him, and you must call him John, and he will be a great joy and delight to you, and he will go forth in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn people back to get ready for God. Now, Zechariah, when he hears this thought, he must think he's going crazy. He says, you're joking. How can this be? I'm an old man, and my wife is past menopause. She's old. And then the voice says back to him, or the thought, I'm Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God, and I've been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now you will be silenced and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you didn't believe in my words, which will come true at their proper time. So then he comes out of the Holy of Holies to all the other people are there and say, well, what's going on? You were in there a long time. And he can't speak, he's utterly mute. But he makes signs that I've seen a vision. So it's a strange story, and it's somewhat disquieting, because it's not, psychologically, can you imagine the immense shock, really, that Zechariah must have felt? It's not every day that you get visited by an angel who then tells you your aged wife and you're going to have a child. And then just because he doubts it, he's then struck dumb. I find that bit typical of some of the stories about Yahweh and the way he does things in the Older Testament, which is if you don't immediately do it as you want, you get smitten or struck dumb, or the image of God is still quite harsh in the mind of these people, and no doubt in Zechariah's mind. I would want to interpret. We could interpret this in a Jungian way and say this is a sort of encounter with his own unconscious, and he's doing this to himself. He's striking himself dumb. But whatever. Did it actually happen? I think something like this must have happened, because it's in the texts. It's plausible, and I think it would have had an oral source. So in my commentary on Luke, I go into that in enormous detail. But it's, it raises this question of what is religious experience? What is an angel? I have an interesting book by Matthew Fox and Rupert Sheldrake, my colleague, talking about the physics of angels. Like, what are angels made of, if they're real? Are they made of some sort of etheric matter that they can have like a ghostly body that flies around? I mean, most religions say that that is possible. In Islam, in the Sufi tradition, angels are made of fire, not of clay, which is what we humans are made of, which probably stands for some sort of etheric energy. In the Taoist religion, also, ascended masters, sages, have like divine bodies of etheric energy and can then visit devotees and people later and bring in sacred texts, holy texts from the Taoist heaven. And you get that in Judaism as well. There's a large angelology. Also in Zoroastrianism. And yesterday, I was on a call for the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. We had the leading Zoroastrian of the Americas speaking, Homi Gandhi, who's a friend of mine. In the Zoroastrian tradition, actually it was a Zoroastrian idea, the angels, which the Jews, Muslims and Christians absorbed. So anyway, I suspend judgment. I can't make a final judgment about what was going on here, but I can say something was interesting was going on, point one. Point two, it had huge repercussions because John was born and he was a very strong spiritual worker, light worker we'd call him, and he was the cousin of Jesus and he had a huge influence on Jesus. And he actually baptizes Jesus later in the narrative. Jesus probably may not have been able to do what he did had it not been for John preparing the way. So, it's an interesting story, and as I say, with big theological and psychological significance. But the mystery of what it actually represents, I mean, this is where in the Christian tradition, you're supposed to take stories like this and then meditate on them. So my daughter's been on a Jesuit retreat this last Easter weekend, and what they do in the Jesuit tradition is they take a story like this and then they visualize it. They do like a visual meditation on it and see what comes, like recapitulate it in their imagination. Because imagination is a vehicle for divine knowledge. It's not a threat or a danger. If it's used properly, if you can control your imagination, it can bring enlightenments. And that's why in Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, there's a lot of visualization techniques done in the same way, and a lot of healers. The secret of spiritual healing seems to me to do a lot with visualization. They found that, for instance, if you want to heal cancer, you've got cancer, and you visualize the cells being eaten up by good things, it can create a relapse. You can be, it can end the thing. There's some scientific research been done on that. So visualization actually helps the self-healing process. So anyway, these are mysteries, and I think one can just say thank you for the people that got these stories down to us at great risk for their lives, wrote them down, and then we can learn from them what we will. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We'll move on. Any questions or comments about this from colleagues?
I think one thing I'm unclear on is I'm used to stories about the Romans persecuting pagans, but this was totally the inverse. So I was wondering about the period and how this changed, because in my research I've done a lot of research about the persecution of anything that is to the left. Pagans were very one with nature, and they did things a different way. And when the Romans came in, they destroyed their temple in the name of Christianity, and Christianity became the dominant force of Europe. I wasn't aware of a period slightly I'm assuming slightly previous
Yeah,
when
yeah.
this was inverted. Perhaps
Right.
you would tell me about this well,
Sure.
it's not the original
Okay.
before the inversion and how it changed, you know.
Sure. No, thanks. Great question. Yes, at the time we're talking about, it's the early Roman Empire, and the Romans themselves were pagans, right? But they were bureaucratic pagans. They were tax collector type pagans who,
Okay.
you know, you had to like do it all the right way according to the forms,
Mm.
and they just conquered Gaul. So we're sitting in free Gaul, which was a Druid stronghold, and the Roman army under the former Julius Caesar just invaded us with loads of legions, and as you say, destroyed a lot of temples, torched a lot of the towns of Rome, of Gaul, and killed a lot of the priests who were called Druids. So the Roman pagans were happy with pagans being pagans, but you had to like be pagan in a certain kind of way. And they tried to invade Britain but didn't get very far to begin with. Under Caesar, they went back later under Claudius and did conquer England and bits of Wales, but they couldn't get Scotland and Ireland. So the Druids lived on there. That was in 44 AD when the Romans conquered England. You're referring to a time later after the Roman Empire became Christian. This is the paradox of history, right? So the Roman Empire was a huge military machine. It believed in colonialism, conquering regions, claiming the territory, and then farming out taxes to the rich aristocrats of Rome, who would go and live off the surplus. It was quite violent. Their idea of a good night out was a gladiator contest in which 10 people got killed in public, in front of everyone, you know. So, yeah, they were quite brutal and bloodthirsty. And they'd done a deal with the, let's call it, the hard right-wing elements of the Jewish faith, which is a colonized region. Judea was conquered by the Romans. And the hard right-wing kind of official Jewish religion said, that's okay, we can live with the Romans. We'll do a deal. Let us do our thing. We'll take care of the religion. And we'll do it your way. We'll make sure it's all squeaky clean. Everyone pays taxes. Everyone sticks by the rules. Nobody grumbles too much. And we just are docile. Meanwhile, you can just carry on and you know, walk around with your legions. And so Jesus was a threat to both these factions. He was a threat to the official Jewish establishment because he was talking about free spirituality. He didn't have the right paperwork. He was healing people on the Sabbath. So they were really annoyed. And they were afraid that the Romans would then, you know, persecute them unless they cleared up this Jesus thing. And the story, which is very interesting, and if you've never read it, you know, I recommend people to actually read, say, the Gospel of Luke. It's like a historical document. Just read it. It only takes a day. And it was a conspiracy between the hardcore Roman legalists and the hardcore Jewish legalists, who then executed Christ with a crucifixion as a punishment to deter other people. You know, he was teaching peace. He was teaching freedom of access to spirit. He was teaching people to pray, and that's always dangerous. You know, I've been hauled up in schools by headmasters for teaching kids how to pray, and it's not allowed. You know. And I always argued when I was head of religion, that head of PE can teach kids how to do running races. You don't just sit in the classroom all the time. You have to go out on the field and do it. So I say prayer's like the applied bit of the religions. And by prayer I mean meditation as well. All aspects of it, silent, spoken, the whole thing. And Christ was doing that, which is a threat to people that want to think in legal terms only. And the tragedy of history is that it did get inverted, because although the Roman Empire converted and became officially Christian, right, it then started persecuting other people. It then turned on the pagans of Europe, and it sort of unleashed its own unholy wars against them. And
Around what year was the conversion?
about 315 AD,
Okay.
when the Emperor Constantine was on
Yep.
the empire, and he said Christianity is okay. His mother was a Christian called Helena, and he converted the empire. Having won a bunch of battles, he only did it because he was a military, powerful warlord. And then he built this new capital city. He didn't really like Rome. He built it in Istanbul, Constantinople. And he said, from now on, that's the capital of the empire. But then they started persecuting the other people. And it seems to be there's this thing in human nature that always is doing what we call othering. So the Christians then persecuted other kinds of Christians. Because you couldn't be just any old Christian, a free Christian. You had to be a Christian according to the empire. And so Constantine got a council of bishops together and said, from now on, you're going to all be Christian only according to this law, which is what became the Orthodox version of Christianity, which then started persecuting people they said were heretics, and burning the books and killing them. And this is a great tragedy. That's why Putin can think to himself, I'm a good Christian, I'm an Orthodox Christian, I'm just going and killing Satanists in Ukraine. It's that sort of thought of killing the other. But anyway, you know, it's complicated, and I've spent years trying to unravel this because I had all these same questions you've got.
Yeah, I was quite aware of the persecution in the book of Luke, persecution of Jesus, but I feel the powers that be, like you say, may have changed form many times. I wasn't aware of their pagan form. You know, I refer to them as Rome. I was aware of them under that name.
Yeah, I don't think all the Romans were bad. I don't think all the Romans were doing the persecuting. There were some good centurions who were friends of Jesus. And in The Chosen, the film, you know, it's really well done because it's the relationship of the Romans who were in Capharnaum is brilliantly shown in the narrative. What they've done is they've gone through the Gospels and sort of turned it into a movie script in real detail. First time it's ever been done. No one's ever attempted this. It's brilliant. Okay, the last thing, we're going to do a tarot, right? But the last thing I want to do is I want to do one reading from the Gnostic writings of Christianity, because we've looked at the official Gospels, right? These are called the Nag Hammadi documents, and they were discovered in 1945 by Muhammad Ali al-Saman, Muhammad Khalifa, great name, a Muslim boy looking after his goats in the desert in Egypt. And one got down into a cave and he followed it down, and he found this amazing cave full of these huge great jars, pottery jars, which had in them these scrolls, and they'd been stuck there for nearly 2,000 years. And he brought some back out, and eventually these scrolls were recognised. Some went on to Cairo, to the market of second-hand bookshops and things, and they realised they were really precious. Sadly, some of them he took back to his mother. She used and said it was just old paper and burned it for firewood. So we've lost some, but we've got quite a lot that survived. The Gospel of Thomas, the Dialogue of the Saviour, the Gospel of the Egyptians, the Apocalypse of Paul, the Gospel of Truth, and so on. And they're fascinating documents. And let's just see what comes up. So I'll ask you to open at random again and just finger on a page, somewhere in the middle, see what comes up.
Second Apocalypse of James.
Okay, thank you. So all these texts are absolutely fascinating. They're being studied by scholars as we speak all over the world. And when I went into the Vatican Library, I have a reader's ticket there in Rome. It's a fantastic library. They have the entire works, of which this is just one, with all the commentaries that are being written about these Gnostic writings, and people are trying to make sense of what they are. Some of them are called apocalypses, and apocalypse means a revelation or an unveiling, and it's related to the word calypse, which means to cover. Apocalypse means to uncover or reveal. So we call in English the book of Revelations, it's the Apocalypse of St. John. So this second Apocalypse of James, which you've opened at, is about James the Just, who seems to have been a brother of Jesus. This is the discourse that James the Just spoke in Jerusalem, which Maraim, one of the priests, wrote. He had told it to Theuda, the father of the Just One, since he was a relative of his. He said, "Hasten, come with Mary your wife and your relatives. Hasten, for behold, a multitude are disturbed over this." He used to speak these words while the multitude of people was seated. But on this occasion he entered and did not sit down in the place as was his custom. Rather he sat above the 5th flight of steps and spoke. "I am he who received revelation from the pleroma of imperishability. I am he who was first summoned by him who is great, and who obeyed the Lord, and who passed through the worlds, and who stripped himself and went about naked. He was found in a perishable state, though he was about to be brought up into imperishability. This Lord, who is present, came as a son who sees, and as a brother. Now again, I am rich in knowledge, and I have a unique understanding, which was produced only from above. That which was revealed to me was hidden from everyone. Now the text is fragmentary, what I've just read out. It's the opening. Some of these texts were very fragmentary when they were discovered. It's a typical Gnostic text because James is saying there that he has access to this secret or hidden knowledge, which the average person, even the average Christian, won't necessarily be able to access. And that passage is quite interesting because he's saying that he's been through these worlds like on a kind of spiritual journey, an out-of-body experience, we would call it. And the commentary says that James in this text is like an escort guiding the Gnostic, that's us, through the heavenly door. So these texts are like manuals on how to navigate through the psychic worlds. I don't think it's literally, like flying around the planets. It's more about learning to navigate through different states of consciousness. And that's just a tiny little tip of the iceberg. There are pages and pages of those sort of Gnostic guidances. The word Gnostic, of course, means knowledge. And I would say that Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism are Gnostic religions because they're premised on the idea of there's a knowledge to find, an enlightenment that can be got if you do certain things, if you choose an ethical path in life. And I believe, I think it's absolutely certain that Jesus was himself a teacher of some kind of knowledge. I mean, all teachers have some knowledge to impart. Christ must have had a knowledge he was imparting, which makes him a Gnostic teacher. And it seems to have gone on even after death. This is what's so interesting about this literature, is that a lot of it is received after Christ has been crucified and risen and then ascended. So these people believe that you can contact Christ in an inner world of a heaven place, and you can download instructions. And that's what these Gnostic texts are. They're the instructions downloaded by psychics who can, we would now call it channeling. They've channeled the risen Jesus and updated the text of the actual Gospels, which just really stick to the story of when Jesus was around. So anyway, well worth reading, very interesting. And you need to read the commentaries and the details and so And yes, I have done a commentary on the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which is in this whole thing, which you can listen to on my Green University website. And I've also done a commentary on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which again is a Gnostic text, which we have. So a lot of interesting information there, I think. And I believe these Gnostic writings should be in every church. I mean, if I was Archbishop of Canterbury, I'd republish the Bible with them all added in, because there's evidence that Jesus himself was reading some of these writings, and there's close parallels between the Gnostic texts and the Kabbalistic texts. So and the books of Enoch also should be in the Bible, in my opinion, because this gives people real food for thought intellectually to study. Instead of seeing, religion as just faith, which you either have or you don't, and if you don't, then it's like a closed book. Why should I read it? I think if we realise that religion is also about knowledge, about learning, about understanding and study, then it becomes more intellectually exciting. And Jesus was a teacher, again, where did he study? That's a whole matter I've gone into in my commentary. I think some of the time in Egypt is fairly obvious from the texts, which is another reason he was regarded as a heretic. It's like somebody turning up in Brixton who's just spent 10 years studying in California and got lots of new ideas. Okay, let's stop there. That's enough of the homage to Easter, shall we say. Let's do a quick, very quickly, we'll do a tarot card and see what gods want to appear, and comment on what we've been doing and what's Easter and from the different theological perspectives. This tarot, of course, is the male gods, and that's why they're unique. Nobody else has done a male deities. So this is a very interesting one we got first, Eon. I'll explain him. Do you want to choose one of those? We'll see what comes up. Jolly good.
Do you do inverted cards?
No, just as they come, that's fine. Right, well there we are. We had him recently. I'll explain in a minute. So we've got the first one is Eon, who is associated in this deck as the Queen of the Air. For various reasons I'll explain. Eon is a very interesting and mysterious deity, and Carl Jung wrote a whole book called Eon, The Phenomenology of the Self. He was fascinated by these ancient traditions, and Eon was a deity known about by highly intellectual pagans in the Roman Empire and the Greek Hellenistic diaspora. And he stands for time, which, if you think about it, is the supreme lord of the universe, because we all depend on time for our being here. I've just finished reading a biography of Einstein by John Gribbin, which I strongly recommend, The Life Story of Einstein, and he was obsessed, fascinated by time, and the links between time and space and the speed of light. It's all very mind-boggling. But Eon knows all that. That's his secret. He is the Lord, as Queen of Air, of the cycles of time. So he's surrounded by a zodiac, which was the ancient way of saying time is a qualitative thing, not just a quantitative thing. And astrology also teaches us that time is about relativity, because the different planets and constellations make conjunctions and oppositions, and so an astrologer can explain all that. And that's the knowledge that Eon brings. Every moment has a quality. It's not just a quantity. And we've secularized time since Newton and since the invention of the clock. We think of time as numbers. But for Eon and the ancient pagan mind, time has qualities. And I think this is why that was implicit in the text when Zechariah is told he's going to have this son who's going to bring in a new age. It's like there's a new era coming to mankind. And it's interesting, Epiphanius, an ancient Greek sage, said that Eon was born from Kore, the Virgin, and this was celebrated on the 6th of January each year. On this day and at this hour, the Virgin gave birth to Eon. You know, interesting, isn't it? Because I think hiding behind the Christ story, a lot of very clever pagans in Alexandria, when they would have read about the Christ story and what had happened, they would say, oh, Eon's been causing trouble. He's been reincarnating into a rabbi and, you know, causing upsets. So Eon, in Jung's work, he reckons that Eon represents the psychic totality of the self, and that he studies this through the Christian fish symbol, and he also looks at Gnostic and alchemical symbolism. And Jung argued that Eon is a kind of ghost at the banquet of Christianity. So the official story, you know, the official church's narrative is very straightforward. You've got Jesus, he's the saviour, worship him, be saved, that's it. Well, Eon is like, well, oh yeah, how does that work? What about time? What about which cycle of time is Jesus going to redeem? And you know, actually the word Eon appears in the Gospels because Christ says several times, he says, I've come to bring a teaching for this eon, unto the end of this eon. And we use the word eon to mean an age. And then they use the term, there's going to be a new eon coming. So, you know, again, time has these qualitative shifts which are related to consciousness. And they knew about this in old India because they talk about yugas, that we're going, hopefully headed towards Sat Yuga, which is the age of truth, which is a qualitative shift. And I reckon Eon shows for that. So I would like, you know, a church of the new Eon to celebrate life, to celebrate resurrection, to celebrate wisdom instead of ignorance and fear. And then persecution of the other could fall away because we're all mirror images of each other. There's also found by archaeologists a house of Eon in Paphos in Cyprus, Roman era house with beautiful mosaics on the floor they've discovered, and Dionysus appears in this. It's an allegorical Neoplatonic esoteric teaching. There's a beauty contest between different goddesses, and Eon gives his judgment on, you know, it's fascinating. So yes, I think what this card represents is the sort of the need for us to shift to a deeper and more cosmic understanding of Christianity and what Christ himself was trying to do. You know, so I'll leave it there. Okay, and now we have Taranis. Taranis, who I mentioned this week, is the Celtic god of this region. He was like the king of the gods, Jupiter. And he's always shown with a wheel. So you've got a wheel in this card. People in Gaul were often buried with their chariots. This has been found up in the Champagne region of northeast France. They've discovered these tumuluses with full-on chariot burials. And it denoted a prince or a druid or someone of importance. And the idea was that after you die, you go on travelling into the other world and you need your chariot with you. If you couldn't afford a full-on chariot burial, you had a smaller tumulus with just a big wheel. And they found lots of these as well, wheel burials. And it was a sign that you're going to meet Taranis, who's the lord of the universe. He's also the god of thunder and lightning, and we had a little hint of it yesterday, a bit of lightning crack. And he's a great deity. He wants us to, you know, enjoy life, celebrate,